Hello, everybody. My name is Jette. I work as a senior DevOps engineer at Zolar. And today I will talk to you about CDK Everything, how we use AWS Custom Resources to improve developer experience when we're integrating with external service providers. One note about Solar, we are a startup based in Berlin, and we are creating an end-to-end platform for solar installer companies that includes features like an AI assistant, a lead marketplace, and many more. At the moment, we are around 50 people, but this is definitely also relevant to bigger companies that want to use not only the cloud vendor and be logged in with everything, but also use other tools to integrate the solution. That brings me to explaining the problem statement. So this is Anna. She is a software developer at a tech company that wants maximum flexibility, and so they choose different tech tools that they need in order to plug in together their perfect solution that can serve their needs. That though causes Anna having to manage different tools, different resources, and talk to other teams to maybe even provide her these resources if she cannot do it on her own. And so she has to keep in mind and manage resources for Kafka in AWS infrastructure, for authentication resources, maybe even for some custom logic, for example, to create databases, and for monitoring resources. This is a lot. She has to switch between different UIs, different CLIs, different config formats, and different documentations, and it causes her a lot of cognitive overload. Managing and timing so many different tools also builds a complex system, which is then really hard to troubleshoot and hard to know where problems arise. And last but not least, it makes her slow. It slows her down. Things take longer to get into production because deployments are slower and have to be timed. And overall, it just gives her a really poor developer experience. And sad developers, they are slower, they make more mistakes, and eventually they will leave the company. So, in order to avoid this from happening, we have found a solution that works really well for us at Solar that I will share with you. So, the first two parts of it are we are using the AWS CDK. For everybody who doesn't know this, it's an open source framework that lets you define cloud infrastructure with like programming languages that you already know, for example, TypeScript. And that's what we are also using. We use TypeScript for everything at Solar. And the thing that makes it special and what we will talk about most today are AWS Custom Resources. Let me give you an introduction into what those actually are. So AWS Custom Resources are a way to extend the classic CloudFormation functionality. So inside of your CloudFormation template, you define a new resource. There's different ways of putting it, but the one that we use here is like custom, colon, and then the name. In this example, it's an auth role. And it takes one mandatory parameter, which is the service token. And the service token is essentially the ARN of the resource that should be invoked by CloudFormation once a custom resource gets created. It's called the custom resource handler, and that can be a Lambda or an SMS topic. We use Lambda functions, but SNS topics also just work fine, and for them you can even hook up a container behind if you see the need. The only thing that's really important is that your custom resource logic can handle create, update, and delete events, because that's what we expect from CloudFormation to come. So otherwise, you can just write any custom logic that you want inside of these. And in our example, the custom resource then just calls our external service provider and, for example, does API calls to create auth resources, or alternatively to create a database, for example, with a user and certain permissions. That we also do with a custom resource that then doesn't really call any kind of really external service provider, but just executes some SQL statements. That also works just fine. Let's look at how this looks like inside of the CloudFormation template. So you can see here a little extract of a CloudFormation template, and on top the custom resource defined with this type. Here it's called do something special. You can choose whatever you want. You see the one mandatory input parameter, which is the service token, essentially the ARN of the handler Lambda function. Then something really nice about custom resources is that you can pass custom properties. So let's say you want to create an auth role, like the previous example, you want to give it a description, you want to give it permissions, and maybe other config parameters, you can pass them all easily in custom resources. But again, here, you provide your Lambda code through a zip or whatever, and make sure it can handle create, update, and delete. This solution works really well for us, and I will tell you why we think this is great. So for once, we have everything as code. There's no manual intervention necessary. So it's easy to understand what happened, version control, everything. So, infrastructure as code is a great thing to have. Then we use TypeScript for everything. So the devs can use a programming language that they already know. So they don't have any learning curve or whatever to start writing infrastructure code. And in the way that we are doing it is by providing a custom infrastructure library that then is very easy to use for the teams. You can see here an example. This is how we really create an auth role at Zolar, some parameters, description name, and the permissions. And everything else is just abstracted away. That is written inside of the library to create all the custom resources that are necessary for this. And the devs can only do this. And it's really easy also to write tests for this. I mean, historically, writing tests in infrastructure has been difficult and maybe not super popular, but with this setup, it's super easy to write unit tests, snapshot tests, whatever you want. And it gives the developers consistency, which means they can define everything they want in one stack. No switching between repositories, no switching between configuration languages, no asking other teams and having dependencies and waiting. They just own everything by themselves and can define it just in one place. And this equals then very happy developers and hopefully also then working effectively, efficiently, and wanting to stay at the company. Like our solutions out there, this one is also not perfect, of course. Throughout the years, we had some learnings, and we also found some limitations to our solutions that I also want to share with you so that maybe you don't run into the same issues like we did. First and foremost, AWS provides some pretty solid documentation for the basic setup when it comes to custom resources. But then there were definitely some things that went wrong for quite some time, and we had to figure them out. One being idempotency. CloudFormation does expect the custom resources to be idempotent. And so we had many issues where, like, if a deployment fails and then it wants to roll back to the previous state, maybe parts of the resources that are created in the custom resource were created, maybe some were not. So if you roll back, how do you make sure that everything is deleted? Maybe your deletion might fail. And so you easily end up with states where you have orphaned resources, you have duplicated resources, or where you have resources that, I don't know, are just lost. And the learning from this is that the fewer API calls that you do inside a custom resource, the better. Second is error handling. Be sure to think of error handling from the very beginning of the development of custom resources, because if you do not, and if your lambdas silently fail, then CloudFormation just hangs because it needs a specific return from that lambda function. And if that doesn't come, then you have to wait until the 2-hour of maximum deployment time window has been reached. And so if you are doing development, it's really annoying to always have to wait 2 hours, of course. So this is something to really think about from the beginning, as well as the deployment strategy. So with doing blue-green deployments, you really also have to make sure that you understand everything, how the creation and deletion, in which order it happens. We did have scenarios where we had for auth APIs, for example, the identifier was the API, and then it would create another one, but it couldn't because it already existed. It wouldn't fail, and then it would delete, and then it would just delete the one that was actually still in use. And we had bad issues with this. So making sure to understand the cycle of creation and deletion is also key here. And the last point is log group configuration. They are created by default when you create a custom resource in CDK, and they are not automatically cleaned up. So when you create a custom resource, I would recommend create your log group configuration also manually, and don't let AWS do that for you. We ended up having like more than 50,000 log groups just laying around and never being cleaned up properly, and that was really annoying to deal with. Those were the learnings. In terms of limitations, of course, all limitations that CloudFormation has also count for custom resources. So if you are now wondering, what about Terraform? Yeah, I mean, if you're using Terraform, then, or if you use CloudFormation and Terraform, then you know like what the issues are with either of them. So of course, CloudFormation has its limitations, and they still apply here. There's also no way of automatic rollback. So you have to take care of this by yourself. Same goes for drift detection. It's definitely worth checking out the CloudFormation registry. Here you have the opportunity to upload some custom resources like privately, so that you can share them between AWS accounts, or even publicly and publish them to the AWS marketplace or on GitHub. This is nice. We didn't really find the resources that we needed in the external space. That's why we built it ourselves, but maybe in some time there will be like a better coverage of resources. I think only a Confluent Service account was there in some Datadog resources, but in no way enough for what we tried to achieve with our setup. So let's go back to Anna, who was very frustrated and unhappy with her setup. And now, because she can use directly our infrastructure library, all this overhead that she had to deal with disappeared, and she only uses CDK from now on, which gives her a very great developer experience. So that's all from my side. Thanks so much for listening. You can find Zolar at zolar.com, and if you want to discuss further, if you have any questions or anything for me, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to receive your message. Have a nice day.